and I would like to welcome the host of the panel, Ross Hall, who is also representing the funder in one way, and on the other way, he is one of people who are trying to get the new paradigm off the ground with learning ecosystems, with new types of human activities, social entrepreneurship. So, Ross, right now you are in this bridging position, and let me bridge over to you to hold this session.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Pavel, and good morning to everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, or even good night. I have no idea where everybody is, but it's a great privilege to be part of today's conversation, and thanks everyone so much for joining the conversation. So as Pavel says, my name is Ross Hall. I'm a co-founder of the Weaving Lab, and my paid work is with the Jacobs Foundation here in Zurich, where we're trying to implement innovative co-funding mechanisms that support deep and enduring system change, specifically in education. And I should give a quick caveat here. I'm definitely a beginner in this space of innovative finance, so please forgive any naive questions I might have. As a child and throughout my life, I've consistently been told that money is the root of all evil. I don't know if that is a phrase that translates into every language. I suspect it is. And I've learned through the years to associate money with greed and with violence and abuse, extraction, exclusion, and poverty, of course. And the way we currently organize capital and use money are often seen as root causes of the environmental and social crises that are unfolding. But surely money can also be a force for good, for solving our problems, for regenerating our planet, and for thriving together. And this is the paradigm shift that we'll be discussing in today's panel. And as usual, as we go through this conversation, please do make any comments in chat. So I'm delighted to welcome 4 panelists today. Ketan Patel is Chair of Force for Good. Rodolfo Tarraubella is Executive Director of CIFAL, Argentina. Makoto Takamiya is CEO of Soramitsu, and Donna Morton, co-founder of Edge Finance Accelerator. So let's jump into it. I'm going to hand over first to Ketan to summarize a very interesting recent report on capital as a force for good. Ketan, over to you.
Thank you, Ross. I want to thank Pavel. Good to see you, my friend. It's been a while. And I know Mile's here too, and we're at least 3 of the original group that assembled at the UN to discuss how the world could be leveled up, made better and more sustainable. And it was, for all of you, it was a magical time where we were a small group of people with enormous hope to make the world better. And out of it came lots of initiatives, and we all stayed in touch. Force for Good was born just during the pandemic, actually, where some of the organizers from the UN and Future Capital got in touch to say, could we look at where the capital was and would be deployed potentially to address the SDGs? And it's a huge endeavor to do that, because they wanted us to reach out to the financial institutions that predominantly manage the flow of money across the world. In my career, I've worked for a large institution, an investment bank. I've also worked in industry. I've worked in consulting and strategic consulting, and I'm today an investor. So I'm used to understanding where the money is, how to fundraise, and how to then deploy it. And we deploy for profit and impact to a mission, which is to demonstrate that actually you can address some of the biggest issues in the world facing ordinary people and do it profitably, so that the people who own the capital feel they got a return that was adequate. And so with that experience, I realized this was such a big endeavor. I wasn't sure I wanted to do it, but we have done it now for 4 years. And our Capital as a Force for Good report this year was perhaps the most ambitious. We begin with the idea that we're failing as a world to live up to what we agreed in 2015. And the latest UN assessment, I think, as you know, suggests that none of the 17 goals will be achieved by 2030. We just haven't put in place the plans of the scale, the level of commitment, the level of financing, the solutions to really make it happen. Only 12% are expected to be achieved or on target. A third of them have either stalled or regressed because of the events in the world. And since 2015, of course, there was a period when there was enormous hope, and there was a huge optimism around just funding everything. And what we saw in 2020, when we first did the report on Capital as a Force for Good, was that the financial institutions around the world felt the weight of the expectations that because they manage the money of the world, they would use it and channel it to funding everything that needs to be funded. And year after year, what we've seen is that they have exceeded the previous year's records in trillions of dollars to see if they could do that. So we began, our first report was quite optimistic because it was saying, look at this mobilization, this commitment which goes to the top of these financial institutions who recognize it's an existential risk for the planet, but also for their institutions unless they mobilize and fund everything. What we discovered over time was that although they were doing as much as they thought they could do, it was actually never going to be enough. That to level up the world in a financial system that we've created where 2/3 of the world are not participants in the global financial system, and they don't have the basics of whether it's education or water or food or security, it isn't possible to actually level up the world without a massive transfer of wealth or a massive regeneration of wealth in parts of the world where it isn't there today. And that requires a level of leadership, commitment, determination, systemic change, which we're not organized to do at this point in time. And we seem like we're in a transition of eras where there is an era that built everything we have and enjoy today. And that was built on fossil fuels. And we have not quite found the thing that will allow us to realize all the dreams of 8 to 10 billion people by 2050, having a great living standard and participating in everything, and how we will do that. That blueprint, although embedded in the SDGs, doesn't say how we fund that, how we organize for that, how we will collaborate to do that, what the answers are, what the underlying energy source will be, and so on. We have the belief that we will find it all, of course, in time. But as we look deeper and deeper, what we realized was that we'd made a fundamental error. We'd assumed that the people who had the money could make the choices, would make the choices indeed, to channel that money towards the rest of the world. If I step back and give you some numbers, there's approximately $440 trillion worth of capital in the world. You would have thought that's got to be plenty. If you look at the SDGs in 2015 and the estimate of the funding requirement and the gap, and then you added inflation, you add the fact we've missed so many years where we've not achieved the targets, so we have a catch up to do in a shorter space of time. We've had massive inflation arise since 2020. We've gone backwards in terms of extreme poverty and hunger in many parts of the world, and we have some wars. You add all that up and you do the maths again, and you find you need something like $130 to $175 trillion. So nearly 40% of the world's gross financial assets are $440 trillion. 40% of that would have to be dedicated to leveling up the world. Or if you took it on an annual basis, 20% of the GDP of the world would have to be channeled to leveling up the world. And what you end up concluding when you look at the numbers just starkly like that is it's not going to happen. And so you have to think, what are we actually going to do? Because if we continue the way we are, and climate change in particular plays out the way it is already playing out, then the south of the world cannot stay where they are. And most of the north of the world will be disrupted as the south moves more and more north, across countries, but across continents. And, you know, there is a temptation, if you read the IPCC report and you look at the detail, and I had to read the whole report, scan report and the whole report too. And what I found was that if you live in the north, you might be tempted to be complacent, to think the temperature will go up, but it's not going to kill my people in the sorts of numbers that will actually destroy my way of life, not sufficiently destroy my way of life. And so there is a temptation to be complacent. But when you actually figure out that all you need to do is put 1 million people more into Germany to displace a Merkel, or 1 million people, not even 1 million, just 100,000 into the UK to cause a change of government. We are fragile societies in the North. We might be rich, but we're fragile because we cannot stand the idea that somebody this different might arrive on our doorsteps and need to be fed. And so our societies are insular and fragile, and therefore right on the edge of chaos and ready to be disrupted. And we've seen the disruption politically, but economically, this disruption will be even more a trigger for political change. So the purpose of the report this year was to draw in all the strands of the politics, the technology, the capital, the economies, the fact that we have these hubs that control the supply of money and the flow of the money across the world, and to take it back to the basics. And the basics, I won't take 2 or 3 minutes more because you have lots of interesting people who are going to opine on this. But the basics are the following. Nearly 60% of the world's money is owned by an individual. So it begins with the individual. 40% is owned by governments. Governments are in many parts of the world, of course, controlled by individuals. So it does come back to the individual. And actually, if we're all realistic here, I know people wear the title of Prime Minister, President, CEO. We're just individuals, right? So ultimately, we have to appeal to the individual's idea of what it takes to do good. So if all this money is to be mobilized, is a bank authorized to take your savings, your pension, your insurance policy for your house or your car, and transfer it to attack an SDG in Somalia? Of course it's not. You take your money out, you put it in another bank, and it will be legal anyway. And so we start to arrive, we don't have enough time, but we start to arrive at the nub of the problem. The system is set up to safeguard the money in very strict rules and keep it where it is. It's not designed to be spread across those boundaries. And so how would it spread? And what we do in this report, and I'm sure we'll touch on a little bit as we go through, is to say it's not as difficult as we think. This money can actually transfer, but we're asking the wrong people. Don't ask the banks. They're regulated, controlled, mandated to do what they do, to look after your savings and to make sure insurance policies get paid and to see if they can build a pension for you. And they struggle to do that well enough in times of disorder. What you have to do is find people who have solutions. And these are usually enterprises of various types and sizes all across the planet. They have edutech or fintech or a water solution and so on. And sometimes when they're corporations, they know exactly how to get the money. They just have to believe that it will be profitable to serve somebody in a part of the world, in the global south, that they have not served before. And if they were to expand their strategy to do that, and they will do it profitably and they will get funded. And the financial institutions will send the money that way. In there lies the crux of the answer, that we've been asking the wrong people. We've been looking for the wrong things. We think money will just flow. It won't. It flows to solutions, and to solutions that allow people to still meet their commitments. And in a world like ours, based on rules, most of us come from that world, there are limitations to what fiduciaries are actually allowed to do. And so innovative solution providers can do that. And I hear at the last conversation we're having on education, the role of AI. And AI is a massive tool to solve this problem. What it took to educate people in a bricks and mortar environment, or even with online solutions, with AI, we can actually leapfrog. And so I look forward to the part where we talk about solutions, because there are some fantastic solutions. And our report identifies 15 solutions, which, if executed and rolled out worldwide, can solve at least 70% of the SDGs. And we identify 6 areas, which are solution groups. And these solution groups can solve 100 to 150% of the SDGs. So I'm enormously optimistic. I just believe we've been trying to solve the wrong thing. We've been trying to convince somebody who has no right to transfer money to somehow squirrel it out with no one noticing and send it somewhere where they're not authorized to do.
Thanks so much,
Not to say that you can't be greedy being, a banker, or not to say money doesn't corrupt you. It can do. All of those human fallacies are absolutely real, but we're looking for systemic solutions, and so we need a systemic set of strategies to actually now tackle this.
Thanks so much, Ketan, for a very sobering provocation, but also a provocation that for me touches on this really crucial relationship between mechanistic changes and mindset changes that are required. We won't jump into solutions just yet, because I would like to ask the other three panelists to very quickly respond to Ketan, particularly in terms of how you would characterize this paradigm shift around capital and money that's necessary for us to move to solve the SDGs or move towards thriving futures. And I'll turn to Rodolfo just to give a quick characterization before we come into solutions, please. And you're on mute, Rodolfo.
Rodolfo, I think you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, now yes. Now yes. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you very much for the invitation. So I want to clarify some things that you are asking me, because I think that one of the things that we have to focus is to understand what happened now with the sectors of the productions. No, we learned that it is primary sector, agriculture, livestock, fishing, forestation, mining, etc. Then we say that it is a secondary sector, that is the industry, the manufacturing, that you take the inputs from the first sector and then you transform it with added value. And then you say that you have a tertiary, a third sector, with the services, commerce, and others. But what happened, because we are not considering one sector. I think that one sector, that this pre-primary sector, it is, because we say agriculture, yes, but what are the inputs of the agriculture? And the inputs of agriculture are not what we are paying for that when we make agriculture or livestock. There are some others, and that others are air, water, climate, and all of these. We can give you a lot of these services that we need to make agriculture. And this is the pre-primary that we are not taking in account when we make accountability, that is nature. And why we don't take it in account? Because now we have something that it is very naturally for all of us. That is, nature is a slave of the human being. Today, nature is a slave, and we need to free it. We need to take accountability of ecosystem services. If not, the best business is to take it that is free and whatever, and it is better to log a tree than to take care.
Super. Thank you very much indeed, Rodolfo. Beautiful closing. To love a tree. It's better to love a tree. Makoto, could I ask you just again to give a very short response in terms of the paradigm shift that you believe is required?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I'm Makoto Takemiya. So I run a Japanese fintech company, and we work with several central banks on digital currency projects. And also I work a lot in the cryptocurrency space. So it's very, I think, a unique standpoint on the economy to work also with the traditional financial institutions and also cryptocurrencies as well. And I think to really re-envision the global economic structure, you really have to understand, what money is and how banks work. And unfortunately, in our educational system, neither of these are explained in an accurate or precise way. So banks, when they give out loans, they don't take somebody else's money and redistribute it. They actually expand the purchasing power. They create new assets that didn't exist before. And because of that, you have money is quite interesting. So I think everyone knows Fisher's equation of exchange, MV equals PY. So it's the amount of money in this society and the number of transactions it's used in per year, the velocity is really equal to the amount of goods and services purchased in society times the price. So you have to have money to back all the transactions that are used, basically. But so what that means is that you can actually expand money and create new purchasing power in the economy, and you can use it to accomplish certain aims. And so I won't go into the solutions now because I'm just responding to the report earlier. So we are, yeah, I think it's pretty obvious. In fact, I travel around to a lot of governments that they are behind in the SDGs, and there's quite a lot of work to do. And I do think that money, because the way it shapes the world, in fact, the type of world that we have is really created by the allocation decisions of mainly commercial banks. So how they allocate the money to fund different projects and companies, and or do they give it to hedge funds or other people like that? So this really determines the world that we live in. So creating a better economic system that really has some kind of what I would call economic rationalization can help us to meet our objectives. And there's good historical examples of this, which I guess I'll talk about more when we go into the the solutions side. But money is really powerful, and I think people really have this bad image of capitalism. Capitalism doesn't have to be a negative thing. It can be a very positive force for good. And in the Japanese economic context, this was called welfare capitalism, as opposed to American-style shareholder capitalism. The idea that capitalism is used, and you use the individual greed of at the micro scale of different individuals to accomplish macro goals that are good for the welfare of everyone. And I think that's a very powerful and an efficient way to do things. So I'll stop now, and I'll talk more about the solutions and how I think we can change the economic structure of the world to accomplish the SDGs and much more.
Well, thanks so much, Makoto. Fascinating. Donna, I'd like to invite you to give your perspective, please.
Good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. I'm on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people in also what is known as Canada. And I think my perspective is complex and sourced in many different directions, because I feel like my life has been that. So I work at the intersections of money and indigenous values, regenerative communities, and how to anchor a perspective on finance that sees money as potentially the mother of all human systems. And I use mother very intentionally. There's nothing on earth faster, more global, and more upstream from either wanton harm or miraculous healing. And so I try to look at finance as a potential embodiment of the feminine and how we can drag this massive system in radically different directions. And I'm very interested in finance being distributed, being wielded and guided by indigenous wisdom and ancestral wisdom, which I think is a radically different direction for finance and gives this multi-generational context. Finance right now is brutally fixated on this moment and the people and benefits accruing to people alive today, and in a way that's very extractive, dominating, and benefiting the very few at the expense of the very many and life itself. And I'm really interested in how we build a new undergirding for finance that learns from Indigenous people with 10,000 year and more track records of living in place without destroying ecological systems, and centering reciprocity, mutuality, and practices like potlatch societies, where the people with the most esteem in a society are valued for what they give away, for how they share, as opposed to how they hoard and painfully accumulate. And I'm also very interested in how we redesign both the governance legal frameworks for finance. I respect what Ketan was saying about the role of banks, but I also think there are ways to redesign financial institutions so that banks actually have a much more profound role in directing how capital flows. And that is really a governance structure. The fiduciary role of banks and other financial institutions, the finance sector as a whole, that's determined by governance. And so when we're looking at the future of finance, we have to really turn back to the original frameworks for finance and banks, and that is determined by governance. And so the people need to have more control over governments, and governments need to have more control over financial institutions. Markets are not good at morality. Markets are not good at building new values into its apparatus. That is the role of human beings. That is the role of all of us, to lay hands on the financial system. And I feel like that's been the story of my interactions with finance. I'm an artist and an activist who decided a decade ago that everything I had ever done on climate change and social justice was inconsequential because I hadn't learned how to wield money. I hadn't learned as an activist how to reclaim the financial world. And I feel like finance is starved for a lack of women, for a lack of diversity, for a lack of Indigenous wisdom. And therefore, it's incumbent upon all of us to take it back and make it actually a reflection of our own ethics and morality, and to have it point at the future that is worthy of our children and actually worthy of our ancestors. And that is not the state of finance as we see it right now. We can move finance and money from harm to healing. And that means we have to set really new conditions, new rules. We have to de-incentivize the destruction and the wanton extraction, and we have to incentivize flowing capital to communities and flowing capital to Indigenous people and to favelas and to hoods and inner cities that have been abandoned by the financial system and governments. And so it's about changing the locus of power. It's about seeing ourselves as worthy of wielding capital, all of us, and then demanding that the financial system becomes accountable to all of us and the children. Because I would argue we are not acting as responsible elders right now when it comes to money. And progressive people are often the most abandoning of finance because of that concept that Patel introduced of, money being the source of all evil, or maybe it was actually Ross that said it. But ultimately, the idea that money is evil is entirely problematic. And it's meant that people with hearts and deep morality and deep and profound concern for the future have abdicated the field of money. That is one of the largest problems. And so I would invite all of us to think about how we each can take it back and get really active about how we interact with financial systems. I'll start there.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Donna. Again, very thought-provoking. Let's turn to solutions now. Let's see. It's interesting and helpful, I think, to get a sense of the paradigm shift that's required. But perhaps even more interesting when we jump into solutions. Now, there seem to be all sorts of promising initiatives. You hear of cryptocurrencies and fintech and impact bonds and impact investment, inclusion banking. This was something I came across just recently. I think actually, Ketan, it was in your report. Debt for nature swaps, nature as owner, landscape finance, and so on and so on. And it's often very difficult to unpick these solutions or to understand how they might work together. And so I'd now just invite each panelist, and we'll start with you, Rodolfo, if it's sorry, Makoto, if it's okay with you.
Oh, with me? Okay. Yeah, see
you
that.
And just to explain the nature of your work from a solutions perspective, please.
Well, yeah, so I work on a very cutting edge cryptocurrency system called Sora, and that's really based on the quantity theory of money. And this theory, a major proponent of it is someone named Professor Richard Werner. Maybe you've heard his name, I don't know. But this history of it really goes back to the Japanese post-war economic miracles. So in 1945, after the war was over, all of Japanese industry was completely devastated, and all the banks were bankrupt, and really the financial system was just completely destroyed. But from that, they went to almost surpassing even the US in per capita GDP. And really, that was really because of the Japanese post-war economic model, which was based on many experiments that happened back in Manchuria in the 1930s and 40s. And it's a fascinating history. I don't have time to go into all of it, but the short answer is that the Japanese studied three different, the two extremes, the American-style shareholder capitalist system and the Soviet-style complete central planning. And the Soviets really went to very precise detail. At the end of the 1980s, they were tracking 15 million individual parts for allocating the different quotas for the factories to do this. Like that's like 3 millimeter ball bearings versus 5 millimeter ball bearings. It's like a really complicated thing, and it's too complicated of an optimization problem to solve even with modern computers. And the American style system was so-called free market, but really it's run by a few moneyed interests for their own good. And the Japanese looked at the two systems and they said, hey, why can't we kind of do something in the middle? And they came up with this idea, which is really sector-based approach. So you have central planning for high-level sectors, but you don't choose the individual companies inside the sectors. So you don't micromanage all the different parts. You just say, hey, as a country, given our location and different factor inputs that we have, we should focus on automobiles because you can take a few $100s of base inputs and turn it into a few $1,000s. So it's a good business. So they did this planning, and that's really what worked out. And it was done in other countries too. In 1966, I think it was, Hattori Masuya went to the bank from the Bank of Japan to work at the Bank of Rwanda, and he was the first, the first governor there after the Belgian guy left after a few weeks. So he actually increased the GDP by 60% in 5 years, using the same type of ideas. And the idea is you don't choose favorites, you don't choose any individual parts, you just focus on the high level planning, and you keep the macro view. And in the chat, Pavel's asking that, yeah, many central banks just say money is money, and they don't try to modern central banks, they don't try to do any kind of, following any social programs or anything like that. In fact, it's in the most central banks' mandates. If you read the legal code in many countries, their mandate is not to have a better society or a better world. Their mandate is price stability. So it's kind of a bad mandate, in my opinion. To really have a good world, you need 4 things simultaneously from a financial standpoint. So all the projects that you have to fund have to, promote to GDP. There should be a new good or service, a new output, because if you're creating money and you're not having any output, you get consumer price inflation or asset bubbles, which is very bad. You also want high HDI. So you want to focus on human development and be able to facilitate human development, not just GDP growth. And you want to do this simultaneously while also not hurting the environment or using up finite resources. And then finally, you don't want to destroy cultural knowledge or indigenous wisdom. I'm actually here in Bhutan right now, just coincidentally, and Bhutan is very famous for the concept of gross national happiness and trying to focus on that rather than just a GDP. And I think it makes a lot of sense. So what we're doing with Sora really is we created a system where people can make funding proposals to a decentralized community, and then people will vote on like should we allocate the money there or not. And the idea is at least you have this democratic oversight and some debate about the allocation decisions, which is better than what we have in the traditional economy. So it's kind of an experiment, so we'll see where it goes. But I do hope that we can, try this out some more. So we've been focusing on funding like some small businesses, but we're still just getting started. So it's really exciting to me, especially since we also work with some central banks to try to link some of these concepts together. And in fact, I am trying to be an advocate when I work with governments to say, hey, you really should think about your central bank act. Maybe you want to change the mandate to not be price stability only.
Super. Thanks so much, Makoto. Fascinating example with, that you can kind of feel the potential in that solution. Let me turn now to Donna. I think if you could perhaps explain your work more in a more precise way, please.
Well, I'm involved in a few things. In the rear view, I was part of a group at a company called Change Finance that built one of the first exchange traded funds on Wall Street with zero fossil fuel exposure, no mining companies, no cancer-causing chemicals, and very high standards for gender, slavery, sex trafficking. And it was a radical experiment in the direction of public market investing. How could we give people and their pension funds and their retirement funds a place to land that both had market-based performance and vastly superior risk mitigation and long arcs, long-term investment capabilities. And it's been a really interesting experiment. It has 125 million. It performs like the S&P, but with infinitesimally less exposure to really bad things. And so that was my first big experiment in finance. The work I'm doing now is sort of twofold. I'm advising and helping a series of private equity funds, venture capital funds, and donor advised funds align their investments with the flourishing of nature, with protecting human dignity, with respecting indigenous values. And that has its own trajectory and it feels worthy of experiment. But the most exciting experiment I'm involved in right now is something that we're calling the Edge Finance Accelerator. And it's an emergent strategy. We're bringing together 25 people across Canada, US, and Mexico, focusing on Turtle Island first, to across sectors and across capital stacks, play with finance. And there's people with crypto backgrounds, there's people working on indigenous finance, there's one of the founders of Generation Capital, there's 2 staff people from the Novo Foundation, one of the largest foundations in the world, and then a whole bunch of really radical younger women that are building funds with very different premises. And in essence, we're having them guided by indigenous scholars like Melanie Goodchild, with people with deep geological knowledge, with people from, radical Black philosophy. And so we're starting with deep values and the values left out of the dominant finance system as the place we're beginning. And then together we start playing with finance structures and collaborating radically across sectors and structures to try and build new paradigmatic options, new experiments that can lead, I think, to some really powerful changes. Because I think one of the things that I believe most people are hoping that somehow philanthropy and impact investing is going to save our backsides. But if you add up all the money in those spaces, it's about $1 trillion. It's a small fraction of the capital that Ketan was pointing at being required to solve for the poly crisis. I am actually more interested in solving the poly crisis than just servicing the SDGs. I'm not saying the SDGs are not worthy of our time or attention. They are, and they're still incremental. And we need to do really big, radical things right now with money. And I'm actually at a place where I'm not really interested in net zero. I'm not really interested in the SDGs. I'm entirely not interested in ESG, because I want us to move to the next level where we're building investments that are capable of doing two things: saving, maintaining, repairing, and regenerating Earth's life supports, one, and honoring and protecting and maintaining human dignity globally, two. I'm really interested in those two things and how we wield money in alignment with those two objectives, because they're the ones that ultimately matter to not just us and equity with people alive today, but in the interest of intergenerational equity, which is our biggest failure in terms of equity. And I'll pause there.
Thanks so much, Donna. Rodolfo, would you care to talk about solutions?
Yes. Let me tell you that I am president of the Eco-Conciencia Foundation. We have 3 missions. One of them it is to shield peace. We develop a methodology of transparency community system to work in the problems of conflicts, no, environmental conflicts. Another mission is to shield sustainability, and in this case, we certify in SDGs companies. And now let me focus in what we want to talk. It is what we are doing about shield nature. In this case, what I told you, it is how to make to put nature inside the accountability, how to put to value the ecosystem services and to put it in the inside of the accountability of the companies. What we need to make, and we are doing, is first of all we have to take in account what are the size of a determined rainforest. You can take a rainforest, you can take a mangrove, but what is the size? Like you can take a factory and you have to say, what is the size of a factory? Now you have to say, what is the size of this factory, that is nature, that the products will be ecosystem services. Then you have to say, what kind of machines do you have in a factory? What kind of life do you have there in this rainforest? You have trees. What kind of trees do you have? What kind of plants do you have? What kind of bees do you have? What kind of animal do you have there? In a second stage, you will have to say, well, you have the factory, okay, the machines, you have it, and you know what machines do you have? You have the size of the machines. You have this rainforest, and you know now what you have there. But are they healthy? What are the conditions that they are there? Because you may have that the nature that you have there are not healthy, and or you have to restore it. No, in the third stage, what you need to do is to say, what are the ecosystem services that these are going to bring to the planet, to the humanity? What are the ecosystem services? And we have a taxonomy of 38 ecosystem services. And these ecosystem services, you have to determine it. And quantity of ecosystem services that this nature, these rainforests are bringing you. In the fourth stage, this is one of the more difficult issues, is what is the link between the ecosystem services bring by this landscape or by this rainforest, and the economy that is working on. The economy, you can say, Panama Channel, it is an infrastructure, and you have there that if they don't have raining, they will not make the services. And what happened with raining? They are in this kind of services depends of nature indirectly, because if they don't have raining, it happens because maybe if they are logging some forest near, and then all the economy of a country, 38% of the economy of the Panama country will drop. And now, you know, this ecosystem services, this economy of a country depends on this. And now, in the fifth stage, you have to say, okay, now in what conditions are now again to begin all the circle again? But the things now, it is that we don't have a lot of time to do it. We don't have a lot of time to make these biocredits, to finance all of this, to put value of this. What I want to tell it is that we need now to know that at the beginning of the year, the risk report of the World Economic Forum, that is the forum of the companies, no, of the big companies, they say we have a big risk in the scenario to 10 years. The big risk is the collapse of nature. The big risk is to arrive to the point of not return. So we have to go faster, and we have to make solutions faster. What we are telling you, we are working in this kind of biocredits that are not carbon credits, they are biocredits. We are taking in account all the ecosystem services that we make that the nature make, and how it links to the economy of the world.
Thanks so much, Rodolfo. Very thought-provoking indeed. I'll invite you now, Ketan, again, just to perhaps digest what you've heard from our other three panelists, and perhaps wrap it up in the context of the solutions you've been talking about also, please.
I've got to say, I really enjoyed listening to all of these, and some of them really touch me in terms of where we go. And so if I plot the journey that Pavel, Mila, and I, in different guises, started in 2019, it was September the 11th, 2019, in New York. The first year, Force for Good focused on the SDGs. Somewhere along the way, we realized that the answer was sustainability, sure, but security and a superior future. So it had to be a sustainable, secure, and superior future for all. I'm also a member of the World Academy of Art and Science, a board member and a trustee. And we have an initiative there called Human Security for All. And what it seeks to do is recognize that every individual on the planet needs security. Security isn't about defense. But I don't know whether you all feel it, but doesn't it feel like we're on the edge of something momentous and potentially not very nice about to happen? You know, there's a war in Europe, there's a war in the Middle East, there's potentially a war to be set up in Asia between China and Taiwan. And it doesn't take too much to string that together for a world war. And it feels odd that we're at this juncture where we're probably at the height of everything we know, the height of AI, the height of breakthroughs in technology, of every single type, whether it's medicines or it's computing technologies or it's edutechs or whatever it is. But it feels like we're also on the edge of chaos. Something has been lost in this seeking of just material prosperity. And some sharing has been lost. And it does call for radical answers. And I find myself thinking that we're nowhere near being radical enough. And I'll illustrate with a solution which we highlight as one of 15. The Indian government took a piece of technology that was an ID technology, turned it into a financial technology, linked it to a financial technology, and within the space of 8 years, opened 500 million bank accounts for people who were almost nameless for the state. So 500 million people got a bank account, a debit card, a savings account, a critical healthcare policy, an accident cover, a soft loan, and access to a payment system to transact with each other for free, to transfer money between each other for free. 500 million people in the space of 8 years. So Force for Good spent some time with the Indian government saying, would you donate this to the rest of the world for free? And the UN would host that. I was astonished how long it takes to get someone to host an event and someone to hand it off. But they did, they agreed to do that. Now, if one country can do 500 million, and we have about 5 billion people to bring proper financial inclusion to, it's not unbelievable that we could solve financial inclusion. But one of the most profound things we learned in the work we've done in Force for Good is the rate of technological change is that we won't need $150 trillion to solve the world's problems because of the rate of innovation. It's just that we don't transfer it easily across our systems, across the world, across boundaries. And one of the biggest efforts we could do is to find the solutions. There are so many out there. We only list 15 of them in the report. There are so many out there. And if we start to collaborate and spread those across boundaries, we will create a far superior society to the ones we're in now, because we are innovating at a rate that we've never seen before on every aspect of life. But unfortunately, if you just took the Ukraine war and you said we were losing the peace dividend, because it felt like we were, and it feels even worse now, and maybe it'll feel worse in a month's time or 6 months' time if something else happens, that will suck out something like $50 to $60 trillion, we estimate, into defense, by which I mean arms mainly, but also other economic defense and trade defense and so on. If you suck that much value out of the system, we have to fight so much harder for innovation to break through and spread everywhere. So we have no lack of solutions. We have no lack of great innovation. Our collaborative model has not worked. It's not just the capital model. The capital model will follow. It's a servant to what we want to do. But we are not showing that level of grand scale. And to put into perspective, putting a man on the moon was a height we thought of scientific achievement. That was 2 countries, but each country had to galvanize their own countries, mainly. To solve even the SDGs, just the sustainability part of what I said, security and superior, in terms of society we have to create, we'd have to galvanize 193 countries. I mean, it's so complex. And so the answer is very much initiative-led, big initiatives that actually just shake things up. They're not waiting for a government to decide, for a power block to decide. It's an initiative that crosses boundaries. And we need to find those and do those. And each of us can do that. Small and big, we have initiatives that we know can be transferred across boundaries. I'll stop there.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, Ketan. This idea, by the way, of crossing boundaries is central to the idea of weaving this. And Pavel talked very early on about bridging, this idea of facilitating the crossing of boundaries where we seem to be typically stuck in our own bubbles and boxes. And I think that is a fundamental going forwards. I know, Pavel, we started a little late. I don't know, have we got a few minutes to wrap up, or would you like me to close?
I think yeah, just maybe 1-2 minutes more for wrapping up. I feel like there was a rich discussion, and there was a comment that in every session was missing some time, but this one we barely scratched the surface.
Absolutely.
But we did scratch the surface, I sense.
I think we scratched the surface. What I'd invite then is just, 5 words from each panelist to perhaps give something we could hang on to and take away with us. Let's see if that works. Anyway, Rodolfo, would you like to share 5 or so words?
Yes, I can tell you. I want to focus on something about that. It is, remember 300 years ago with the slavery, the people was naturally to be slaves in the war. And now, when I am talking that we have to make nature into the accountability, some people say, oh, too commercial boy this. He's thinking about money, includes in the monetary system, include nature. What happened with him? Okay. What happened with that gays that say not to slavery, of the human slavery? The people say to them, they are abolitionist. Please, I want you, I want me, I want others to be abolitionist of the slavery of nature.
Super, thanks, very powerful. Donna.
Two ideas. One, make investors and banks responsible for their impacts. And two, embed sovereignty into nature-based solutions. So biocredits and any of the nature-based solutions have enormous promise as long as they don't erode the sovereignty of indigenous and local communities.
Beautiful, thank you. Makoto?
Yeah, I think we need more collaboration and less competition. I think if we work together, there's nothing that we can't accomplish.
Beautiful. And Ketan?
Just two things. One, I think we need to start to price externalities. I think Donna was also getting at this. We're not pricing externalities, which means that we're making decisions that will not be sustainable, will not do good, and are suboptimal. And the financial system will support pricing things properly. The second thing is that, fundamentally, we must redefine who are we. I think what we keep doing is defining we as our tribe, and everyone else is outside of we. But the definition of we needs to be recut for us to actually be inclusive. We seem to find so many reasons to think we're different, and that needs to change. Otherwise, we will not help each other.
Absolutely. And I think for many of us, that definition of we absolutely includes the rest of nature, not us or nature, but us as nature and with nature. Well, thank you all very much, panelists, for a really rich conversation. I feel like I want to sort of dive into everybody's work much more deeply and then see how it all connects. For me, what I hear, keywords that I hear from my own bias, of course, is to move towards thrivable futures. We need to weave across boundaries. We need to be radical. We need to shift mechanisms and mindsets. And I think what that might mean is being with money in a certain way, this idea of our deeper values and attitudes, how we are with money, helping money to flow, and being with money with an expanded consciousness. I like that phrase Connie put in the chat. Pan-indigenous wisdom, to be with money with a deep wisdom, and perhaps most fundamentally to be with money with love. So thank you all very much indeed, and I'll hand back over to you, Pavel.
Thank you. It was a really beautiful conversation. Today, I feel hungry for actually organizing a full proper conference around each of these conversations and feel like, okay, we're just starting, we're just warming up. We need a real deep, thorough discussion and action-oriented discussion too. Because thank you, Ketan, thank you, Donna, Makoto, Rodolfo, for making it all real. It's not only like you're envisaging this, you are not theorists here, you are actually implementing all of this. So very inspiring. And also what I sensed, I actually checked with my wife Katerina and say, okay, do you comprehend what is going on here? Like, do you feel like, is it getting too esoteric here, this conversation? That is my other question that I constantly experience when it comes to sophisticated legal and economic structures that in fact are the backbone of our society. They are too esoteric for our communities, and the question is, how do we combine complexity with simplicity? Something that I hold, because on one hand we need this sophistication because the world is extremely intertwined, interconnected. and it requires really a lot of nuances, a lot of diversity of situations, of technologies, of infrastructures to support, as is nature. It is. So we are, in a way, in the human world, we are mimicking nature, and probably this will get even more sophisticated. But at the same time, it needs to be governed by some very fundamental basic principles. So yesterday, for example, we had a presentation and discussion from Jack Bancroft, who is the founder of one of the largest mentorship networks for youth in Australia, connecting the indigenous practices with, let's say, modern Australian practices. And he was mentioning the fact that the way that societies were governed in indigenous way was very, let's say, in many regards, very simple. So that simplicity of principle that underlies the complexity of solutions, I think, is what we need to look for. And that's where I sense the potential of this last session today, which actually kind of, we've started today with exploration of economies, that what are the possible pathways into the future? What is the possible models and principles of governance? What is the future of work? Or some panelists suggest that maybe we should stop talking about work as such, because it's really rooted in the industrial paradigm, and we need to begin thinking about human activity for human flourishing. Now we discussed the architecture of finance and financial systems and the role of money and capital in making transition to new economies and new societies.